welcome to the post-lunch session. I hope we're all not sleepy and energized for the session because this is a very interesting topic, especially because we're all in Hyderabad. So I'm sure we're all looking forward to this. We have two speakers, Afsar Mohammad and Zeenath Khan, and the moderator is Serish Nanisetti. The session is Hyderabad, September 1948. Afsar Mohammad writes poetry and short fiction in Telugu and English. Evening with the Sufi 2022 is a translation of his poetry, and Sahil Will Come and Other Stories 2025 is a collection of his short stories in translation. His other publications include The Festival of Peers, Popular Islam and Shared Devotion in South India 2013, and Remaking History 1948 Police Action and the Muslims of Hyderabad 2023. Zeenath Khan has written on history, travel, and current affairs for Scroll, Mint Lounge, Siyasat, Literary Traveller, and Daily Times Pakistan. The Sirens of September 2025 is her first novel. Our moderator, Serish Nanisetti, is a journalist and writer known for his reporting on politics, economy, culture, and urban life. Deeply interested in history, museums, and the lived textures of cities, he writes with an eye for context and consequence. He brings a journalist's curiosity and a storyteller's instinct to conversations on Hyderabad's history. So, over to you.
Good afternoon. It's not a happy thing to have a session just after a good lunch, but I'll try to keep your interest alive. And the subject is very interesting because it's about September 1948. For those who don't know, September 1948 is the time when Hyderabad merged with India. And where we are sitting is just across the road. On that side is a fork in the road. One road goes to Hyderabad, another road goes to Secunderabad. The Indian Army marched on that road to Secunderabad on September 17th, and that led to the merger of Hyderabad with India. So these two books, one is fiction, one is non-fiction, put these issues, put these things in a context. And they frame them in, I've gone through the book, so they frame them from a perspective which most historians have not done till now. Like Afsar Mohammad's book tries to see how fiction and language people have approached the subject of 1948. Whereas Zeenath Khan's book approaches the same subject through a different perspective, through a fictionalized account, which is like almost framed like the Southern America before the Civil War, after the Civil War, a graceful, peaceful, nice time, and suddenly it's wrecked by these events of one day kind of a thing. So I'll begin by asking one question to both of you. Like usually what happens is when we research something, we learn, the old notions keep changing. So I wanted to ask from you, like before you began the research and after doing the research, what changed and what is the change that has come in what you have found that's there in the book?
Thank you so much. Is this good? Thank you to the organizers of Hyderabad Literary Festival, and then the moderator, Serish, who actually was one of the earliest reviewers of my book. And I'm so delighted to be here with Zeenath Khan, whose historical fiction explores multiple dimensions of the history of police action. So now, one thing that I could say about my research, before research and after research, right? As mentioned in my introduction, in 2013, I published a book on Muharram, but in Telugu context, Muharram is called as the Festival of Peers, Peerla Pandaga. So I focused mostly on how Muharram becomes a site, talk about saint practices practiced by Hindus in Telangana and other places in Andhra, Rayalaseema. During that visit, and I think I started working on this book in 2006 actually. It's a long journey. I took a lot of time to finish this book. So when I field research, I ran into one Marsiya performer who sings during the Muharram, 10 days Muharram rituals. Particularly narrates the story of Karbala, both in Urdu and Telugu. So when I met him, elaborate conversations, he mentioned about 1948 police action. So actually, to quote him, he said clearly, whatever all Tehzeeb, the hybrid pluralist culture of Hyderabad or Deccan, and the ihsan, the beauty of Deccan, those were lost forever after 1948 police action. So my question was like in this book is to look at how 1948 police action impacted this pluralism of Hyderabad, Deccani culture, and then how it also impacted the beauty of everyday life, which is a combination of Hindu-Muslim practices. But again, I took another step in 2010 and then documented 150 witnesses of the police action. Literally, there is no documentation of police action except in fictional writings. So Zeenath, actually an extension of that fictional tradition that speaks about police action in fiction and memoir. So I actually started asking myself, how come there is no official documentation of this huge violence when 50,000 Muslims were killed throughout Deccan and some 100,000, 1 lakh people migrated to other parts of the world, including the USA, and then Pakistan and other parts of the world. So my question for Kudus Sahib, the singer who told me the historical, this entire chronology of the violence actually came from him, right? And then I started meeting the witnesses one by one, mostly women. Women came forward to talk to me rather than men. Men were so restricted, like they don't want to talk about this violence. And only women started talking about this. And then, so that was the beginning of my research. And then those movements actually made me realize that, oh yeah, there is so much lost in history writing. Dominant historians, dominant historiography never cared for this history because they were all focusing on nationalism. And then, of course, there are other movements like Telangana armed struggle, leftist movement. So this is like a double oppression of this entire movement. And then after research, when I started digging archives, I literally had no evidence. In evidence, you just find the documents related to freedom struggle, and then separate linguistic state of Andhra, and the leftist movement, only these 3 episodes. Nothing about police action, which is actually very often compared to another partition, by local Hyderabadis and Deccani people. So how come this is big? Of course, we have a lot of literature out there about partition, both fiction, non-fiction, academic and non-academic materials, right? How come there is nothing about police action? So after research, I realized that I need to challenge these positions, and then I depended mostly on fictional narratives. That is where our work actually blends. And I also depended on memoirs. Thank you for the question.
Zeenath, can you put this thing in perspective? Because your book is fiction, and there's a huge amount of violence that has happened. Why didn't you choose non-fiction to address this rather than why did you choose fiction?
I thought when I read in detail about what happened, about the events that led to Hyderabad's integration with India, I thought they would make an excellent backdrop for a novel. You have a lavish setting, a plot, many wayward characters, a lot of intrigue, and I thought this is going to make a brilliant novel. And I always felt that novels in cinema concentrated too much on partition, whereas they neglected the events that happened in the South. And most of our history is also concentrated on events of the North. So that's why I chose to write a fictional perspective, also to make people relate. I wanted my readers to relate to the characters in my novel as human beings, and what they went through during that time. Because when you read facts, they become kind of dry to read, like a textbook. But I thought when you write them, if I wrote it as a story, it would be interesting, and I could make my readers perhaps feel more empathy for what happened and for what the people actually lived through.
But if you see, there, as Afsar said, like 15,000 people were killed, and the violence was at a scale. And even now, many people don't know about the kind of violence that has happened. Even now, for example, when we say 15,000, there's another number which says 25,000.
Yeah.
And there's another number which says not many people would have died. It's all three perspectives are there.
Yeah.
So why approach it from a fictional perspective? Why not a non-fiction thing with proper documentation so that everybody will know this is the truth?
So I wanted this story to be narrated, so this character came to me, I just conjured her up, and I knew that I would write a book and have this, the story of what happened in Hyderabad be narrated through her eyes. The prospect of writing a whole book in non-fiction was not going to be the kind of writing I wanted to do. I wanted to recreate the world. I wanted to showcase how the aristocrats lived and how their world stumbled, and also their short-sightedness, which I highlight a lot in the book through the other characters, even how the government fumbled, how the army was just a sham.
So, Afsar, you had access to a lot of archival material. So, but you chose to find people and their voices and record them in your book. Do each of them back up, like the archival material back up the anecdotal evidence? And does the anecdotal evidence back up the research material in whatever you have encountered in the archives?
So most of the material from my book comes from what we call oral histories. So few sources from archives, like governmental documents. Even those documents I couldn't get it here. I got them from British Library. So most governmental materials, even the media reports, they were against the entire movement that happened between 1948, September 13th to September 17th, right? So that those 4 days, like remained confidential in many documents. They don't want to reveal the details of those 4 days. And then I had to depend on witnesses. Even that's not easy to find witnesses. It already it's like happened in 1948. And then I started talking to these people in 2006 to 2010, right? It's a long time. And then people actually, most of them, they really were scared of talking about this. Because by that time, in 1998 in Hyderabad, there was 50th, they called it celebration of Telangana liberation, which the position I challenged in my book. How could you celebrate violence? That was my question. And the most of the evidence that I got from like 150 people who spoke about this violence, they all spoke about massacre, violence, attacks, and then how families were scattered to different parts of the world. Actually, in USA, you find a lot of people who migrated to USA after 1948, right? So, unfortunately, out of these 150 witnesses, we lost 90 people, 90 witnesses during the COVID. So that was the moment when I started thinking about this. And then I started getting calls from these witnesses. You are just, how far you are with your work. Oh, this is an academic work in general sense. But there was a lot of interest in non-academic communities, particularly from Deccan. So they started calling me and asking me, when are you going to finish the book? I was literally crying. Whenever I kind of documented all these evidences, like audio evidences on my iPhone, and then when I started listening to them, I actually, like every time I open any audio, it's like a traumatic for me. I couldn't even write a single sentence for 10 years. And then Abdul Khudus Sahib, who actually informed me about this violence for the first time in 2006, he died. And then his students who were trained in Muharram performance, as they called me, Bhai, you should start working on this. Abdul Khudus Sahib, when he was about to die, his only wish was to see this book published. And then that moment actually made me go back to those oral testimonies and then connect with fictional narratives. There's a lot of material from fictional narratives. But most important, like for me, is like autobiographies written during this particular time. A lot of memoirs published in newspapers and then published by Urdu media, particularly like Siyasat, and then other Golconda, the Telugu magazine. So they actually published elaborate memoirs, personal narratives. So I combined all these sources and then created an alternative archives because I couldn't believe in governmental archive. So this movement actually helped me to like express my own resistance to the state-sponsored narrative of the 1948 violence. So this entire story, that is why it is called remaking history. So I tried to reconstruct that history from the below, from the people who were marginalized, who were victimized, who were like totally like invisibilized. So I took that movement to like give voice to them. And then these narratives, they are actually the combination of these oral stories plus literary narratives, media reports. So a lot of things happened after research because I have lot of material now after this.
Okay.
After research, after the publication of this book, I have a lot of material now, and then it is still waiting to be written. I'm not sure when I'm going to write them.
Actually, we are living in an age of instant fiction and instant non-fiction. Like a lot of our history is being fictionalized right in front of our eyes on Instagram, social media, and other things. Every day we keep hearing about some new fiction that comes up, and a lot of people get on to dismiss it as not the truth, but by the time it is too late. So how safe is it to see reality through fiction? Because some of the sources that you mentioned are through, they're fiction. They're not the oral history, oral records. So how safe is it to build a story using fiction? I think you can answer that, and then you can.
So writing fiction, I think you can take a lot more liberties because it doesn't have to be 100% factually accurate. I think when writers of non-fiction cannot take that liberty. So I could also fill in the gaps using my imagination. I think all fiction writers do that. And I also enjoyed the whole process of creating that lost world, of how the city would have been, how they lived, how they dressed, what they did for entertainment. So, and what I couldn't find through research, I had to use my imagination to cover that.
No, actually, my question is a little different in the sense, I wanted to know, like for example, today if you say Bagmati, 50% will say it is fiction, 50% will say it is the truth. Okay, so when we are having such a competing force from something that is alternative reality, how do we deal with fiction? Like when you fictionalize things, doesn't it change the perspective of the people? Like for example, in your book, there's a reference to some people eating croissants. In 1948, I don't think I knew about croissants till about maybe 2000 or 2005, right? So how do you deal with such a thing? That means how do people, is it the truth that in 1948 people in Hyderabad were eating croissants?
No, people in Bombay were eating croissants.
Okay.
So my character goes to Bombay, and Bombay was a very westernized city and very anglicized. So I don't know with 100% certainty if the croissants were available. Perhaps they were. I would be surprised because croissants were quite a mainstream in Europe, and Bombay was, because of the British influence, they had everything available. Until the 60s, it was a very westernized, those vestiges of the British Empire remained. So she also says that she'd never heard of croissants, and she found them in Bombay at the Willingdon Club. I don't think that's too far from reality. Even if it wasn't, it's not like I could be held to account. Yeah. So that's the liberty a fiction writer has, yeah.
I wanted to ask you, when you collected the material, how did you sift through what is the oral, people have imagination. Even in oral history, there is a lot of imagination. I'll tell you, like a reporter, I recently went to one fort. So we heard a loud roar, and me and my photographer was there. And later the photographer said, he actually saw the leopard. The leopard was not there. We didn't see the leopard. So the people's oral thing changes. So how did you deal with that to ensure that your book is accurate?
Thank you. That's actually a really great question. One of the challenges as a historian I was facing, that was the first challenge I faced, because even Cambridge University reviewers, they also raised the same question. How could you use fiction to talk about history? So it's like the same response I could give, like Zeenath kind of response is as well. But my understanding is that in new histories, the line between reality and imaginary is extremely thin. Particularly when you are talking about historical incidents, of course, people always tell the story from the lens of their subjectivity, their self, their experience. But we need to value that experience as a historian. It is often, in traditional history, we often ignore the actual experience of the people. We just worry about facts and figures. History is more than that, right? We need to get into the experience, the actual experience, what was happening in everyday life during the police action. How these two communities, Hindus and Muslims, who were they kind of shared the same self, same tehjeeb, same beauty of life, how they were experiencing this rupture. So of course, there were moments when I started doubting the experience, but I don't, that's like disrespecting my evidence, right? Disrespecting my testimonies, my people who experienced this violence, right? They know better than me how was the experience. So I started there. So then I started respecting that difference, testimony, and then it was, for me, it's really important. Of course, I always try to analyze that experience from my own methodology, because at the end of the day, you need to have a methodology, right, as a historian. But having these testimonies before me, that actually helped me to analyze things, reality, in a better way than the documents produced and circulated by official sources. So anything that challenges official sources, it is worth. Even during, you can say, make the same argument in the case of Telangana, armed struggle, or the recent Telangana movement, right? We need to care for the experience of the people. And then we need to see how those experiences have similar concerns, similar expressions, similar symbolisms, similar narrative tropes. And the characters, that is possible in a novel, right? But of course, I actually dealt with those novels here. So I wanted to balance the actual characters in the history who played the role during the violence and the fictional characters. Like Qasim Rizvi is a character in many fictional narratives. So it's all about balancing, the art of balancing. That is where the spirit of historian lies. Thank you.
Thank you. We would like to throw the floor open for questions. I hope people have a lot of questions. Please identify yourself and also say to whom the question is addressed.
Hi, my name is Maurya. My question is both for Afsar and Zeenath. For Zeenath, my question is why the Hyderabad police action? Because I think I just read your profile and it seemed like you were previously focusing on a lot of other things. So what was it about Hyderabad's police action? I don't think I'm using the words wisely, but the police action. Why did that form the basis for your novel? And then for Afsar, my question is, I think the work you're doing is really great, and there are many opposing forces right now for your work to survive. So what do you think should change in our society for a balanced approach for, the history to survive?
So I chose to write my book against the backdrop of the events of So I chose the events of Hyderabad's integration with India as a backdrop for my novel because at the time, people largely forgot about it later. Even though I grew up in Hyderabad, I didn't know much about what happened. I knew that the Nizam ruled Hyderabad, then it became part of India. I had no idea about the events that led up to it. But when I did my research, and as I was doing my research, and I read the newspapers from that era, from 1946 to 1948, and even in the broader Indian newspapers in British India, news from Hyderabad was front page news every day in the headlines. And the Nizam's activities and his his wish to not become part of India, it was very much in the news. Then after that, it seemed to have become an insignificant event. And whereas partition is documented and everybody, even a non-Indian would know about partition, most Hyderabadis also don't know exactly what led to, how Hyderabad became part of India and all that happened. So I was determined to write as fiction because I thought it just had all these, it would just make a very interesting novel with all that happened then. The arms smuggling, the general, the army, and the nobles, and were still continuing to play polo and live the high life and go to parties. They didn't really foresee, they didn't make any provisions for what was to come. So I think my book highlights the folly of the people in charge then, and how the aristocrats also didn't see what was coming. So that was my objective in writing this novel.
Thank you so much for the question. Thank you for the response. I think I'm also responding in a similar way. But in history, one thing that you mentioned is like opposing viewpoints, right? How do you balance opposing viewpoints? One thing that we need to understand that whether you are talking about partition or some other incidents happening in the global world, like Israel and Palestine, and then that's the same argument. Like, how do you balance opposing viewpoints? For me, just like partition, 1948 police action was the site of multiple ideologies, both political and historical, and also practical matters, right? So you have like different versions of the history. Like, as I mentioned earlier, there is a Marxian viewpoint, there is a nationalist viewpoint, there is very vernacular viewpoint. As Zeenath was mentioning, there is the very much evidence that comes from Hyderabadi base, right? So how we get information, we get testimonies from all these opposing viewpoints. But as a historian, I felt the need that we need to understand the pain and the trauma of the people who actually suffered, who remained victims of this violence throughout their lives until their death. They couldn't meet their friends, they couldn't meet their family, they were elsewhere, and then friends were like separated forever, and then there is a separation between the Hindus and Muslims. So that kind of lens helped me to see like the multiple dimensions of opposing viewpoints, right? But out of all these opposing viewpoints, as a scholar, as a student of this particular history, I also felt the need to understand what was actually happening on the ground, what was actually happening in the Hyderabad city, what was actually happening in other non-Hyderabadi regions in Deccan. So the question was more about like this vernacular understanding of the violence. So that's the reason why most of my material comes from Deccani Urdu and Telugu. I'm not using materials from like English media, because English media like totally like biased at that point. And then only Telugu media, and then media just like Siyasat, they were actually balancing the reality on the ground. So the question that's more important for me is like how much of that reality on the ground you're able to capture. How much you are able to privilege, give voice to underprivileged sections of the community. So these two questions, they remained most important for me. From this lens, all those opposing viewpoints, they were all political. They have nothing human. There is no humanistic approach in political philosophy at that point. My own family came from leftist background. They were part of Telangana armed struggle. Whenever I talk to my grandparents, because they were like staunch activists of the movement, they never disclosed any aspect of violence during the conversation. Oh no, beta, everything was good. We finally got, the Telangana armed struggle was successful. We got the independence. And then, of course, what about communists that were killed? What about the Muslims that were killed? What about the Hindus, particularly women? They were like killed on the roads. And then they had no response. So my responsibility as a historian at that point when writing this book was to document their voice, not the dominant voices. Hope this helps.
One more question.
My question is to my brother Afsar. I am Atreya, he is Afsar. And you have said that you didn't want to rely on the government's documents. Government documents means post-independence government. That is one. And next, do you rely on the documents of Nizams or of Razakars? That is one. Another thing is that this so-called police action resulted in a kind of violence you are saying. You are trying to differentiate politics from the societal issues. Politics represents only the people. If there are half a dozen parties, people are part of that, isn't it? After all, political leaders also try to gather what is in the mind of the people, isn't it? And when it comes to the power and all that, India has faced 1,000 years of slavery and all that, isn't it? In spite of that, we have harmonious movements also. We have struggling movements also, battling movements also. So in retrospect, whether your historical perspective okays the police action or negatives it. And again, what are the lessons we have to learn to live as a harmonious society in the country? That's all.
Thanks.
I'm not sure how much time do we have. Because I'm actually to listen to Zeenath because she published a recent book on police action. So the question is valid. So one thing in history, historiography, is that you try to, yes, of course there are positive side dimensions and dimensions. But in the case of police action, throughout the history, we were exposed to negative dimension of the police action, and the blame, Muslims were blamed all the time, right? Even Muslim activists within these organizations, they were never given any role, right? So we need to understand that there is a lot of negativity. After this incident, the Siyasat newspaper, which came out of this entire the effect of violence, right? So they started reconstructing that dimension of Muslim identity by using language, cultural resources, and also supporting girls' education, particularly Muslim girls' education, right? So these efforts, in the history, of course, in the book, I actually focused more on how the community in Hyderabad was resilient and tried to reconstruct their everyday life from this burial ground. Because everything was like scattered, shattered, and then people had no hope at all. And that they had to reconstruct every aspect. That is the story.
We have time for one more question, maybe.
My question is that after this violence, so how, as you talked about this, society reconstructing itself, so what was the impact of this, sudden violence on the society, and how did it reconstruct itself, and what was the difference from before the violence and after the violence in the society?
Thank you. Actually, if you look at the history of Hyderabad city between 1948 and 1950, even 1948, just 1 year, you see that there were numerous organizations from the old city of Hyderabad. So one of the prominent organizations was, I think some of you are familiar with that, Tamire Millat, means reconstruction of the community. The organization's title itself is Reconstruction of Community. Tamir Millat. Tamir is reconstruction, right? So, but this organization was very key. This was started by, not by some politician, not by some intellectual, but it was started by an elementary, a school teacher from elementary school in Old City. So the teacher who was teaching in this elementary school, he was so pained to listen to this pain, like all the stories. And then, no, we should, rather than stuck with the violence, yeah, we should reconstruct the community. The reconstruction should start with the education. That too, girls' education. So the entire activity of Tamire Millat, it's about girls' education. And then they started like Urdu pamphlets that speak about Islamic reformism. And the other dimension is Hindu-Muslim exchanges, like how should we cooperate and collaborate with Hindus, who are the big part of the society. So all these aspects became different phases. But just within 1 year, despite all this violence, the Muslim community in the Hyderabad city particularly, it took a while for a rural Hyderabad state to recover, restore everyday life. But Hyderabad city restored its resilience, and then peace, and then economic mobility, upward mobility. So this book actually documents that aspects of resilience, reconstruction, education, reformism, social activism, progressivism. These are the 4 components. And then Muslim gender discourse, the 5th idea. So these 5 dimensions made the city. So the city you are witnessing now, that's the result of these 5 dimensions of the history. Thank you.
I would try to frame the answer a little differently. In the sense, when we talk about 1948 and the police action, both Zeenath and Afsar know that there isn't enough material about police action. The reason why we don't have that material is people didn't want to dwell on that. People wanted to move on. Both Hindus, both Muslims. And Muslims actually lost an agency to communicate what has happened. A lot of violence happened in Gulbarga, Bidar, Raichur, Latur, and the Marathwada areas of this thing. Not in the Hyderabad, not in the Andhra bordered areas of Telangana. So that's why we have very limited information about the police action. And the Muslims actually lost an agency. They could not tell what has actually happened. So we should be proud that now people are able to think, write, and tell us what actually happened. One of the only books that came after a lot of years was Hyderabad After the Fall by Khalid. Okay, so that was one of the books. Omar Khalid. So he's a Hyderabadi, he documented a lot. So that was one of the books that has come out, and that had historical information about what happened, about the Pandit Sundarai Commission, then the UN case and all those things. So right now we are moving at, I hope we'll have more information, more conversations like this, and more books on Hyderabad, because currently I don't think we have enough books on Hyderabad. So thank you for a nice conversation, and thank you for being a nice audience.
Have a last word. Can you show the title of Zeenath's book? I'm a strong believer of historical fiction. So whatever written about 1948 police action, we need to support that creativity, support that kind of work. I encourage you guys to get the copy and then discuss the book. Thank you so much. Congrats. Mubarak.